Introducing the remarkable archetype, the dangerous gentleman. With a demeanor that commands respect and a hint of potency, he embodies strength tempered by virtue. Though his capabilities could veer towards danger, he channels his power for noble causes, serving others and safeguarding those in need. Rooted in a profound love for both God and humanity, he navigates life with discipline and purpose. In his presence, one witnesses the harmonious blend of power and benevolence, a testament to the true essence of masculinity. Step into the world of the dangerous gentleman, where strength is wielded for righteousness, and discover a captivating embodiment of honor and valor.
Welcome to Storytime with the Dangerous Gentleman. Yes, I am the Dangerous Gentleman. No, I did not give myself that nickname, but I certainly did earn it. Today, before we jump into the actual episode, the full story, we're going to do a little bit of a follow-up based on my episode from last week about Lauren and the refried pea. So I shared that story with Lauren. I shared with him the teaser about that, and he said he laughed the whole time. I shared it with my brother, too, who was there, and he said he knew exactly what I was talking about before the story barely began. And then when I shared the full episode with Lauren, he said he spent half the time crying and half the time laughing. It brought back so many memories of that time in his life. And he described us fairly accurately as that we were kind of like the Goonies. If you, maybe an older reference for some of you, but most of you will get that. Most of you have seen that movie. And that's the kind of the way he described us in our childhood. And I was like, he's not that far off. He even ended up sharing that episode with his kids. And his kids said, "Wow, Dad, I didn't know that you were that cool when you were younger," especially the part about wearing Vans. His kid really appreciated that idea because I don't know if he's not cool anymore. I don't know if we're ever cool to our kids, but anyway, it increased his cool factor with his kid. As a result of all that, Lauren and I and Dan have started a conversation, and we're discussing the idea of getting a little reunion together this summer. So that would be pretty awesome. So the story that I'm actually going to tell for today, I'm going to call it You Still Believe. But in order to get to that part of the story, I actually have to jump back. And the reason that this all came up is because of what today is. Today is April 9th of 2024. On April 9th of 2014, so exactly 10 years ago, is when my life started to spiral. On April 8th, 2014, that was the last time that my whole family was together in the same house. We all went to bed. I had a wife. I had 3 kids. I had 2 cars in the garage. I had a great job making $80,000, $90,000 a year back when that actually meant something. Lived in a 3-bedroom house in a gated community. Basically, I had the American dream. And as I've already stated, on April 9th, that all very quickly started to unravel. I won't get into all the details, but April 8th, I went to bed with my whole family. April 9th, I went to bed alone. My brother came over, consoled me for a little while to help me talk through some of the stuff, but for the most part, I went to bed that next night alone. I didn't sleep, as you can imagine. And there's a whole lot of details and a whole lot of stuff that went down to make that day happen that I'll get to in another story. But I just wanted to set the backstory for where that eventually led to. I lost everything. I had nothing. And I blamed anyone and everyone but myself for that. That's really what got me on the road to the realization I had that I talked about in the episode about radical responsibility, where I learned to own my mistakes. During this time, I blamed everybody else. I blamed my wife. I blamed my family. I blamed social workers. I blamed attorneys. I blamed God. Like God had failed me. Like my ultimate end and goal in life at the time was to be a good father and a good husband and provide for all of them. And now I didn't have any of that. And I felt like my purpose in life had been robbed, had been taken away from me. And over the course of the next couple of years, life spiraled. I ended up doing things that I never thought I would, experiences that just seemed so far out of the ordinary to me. So far from anything that I ever imagined. And I tell people now these stories and they're like, wait, what, you? People who knew me before are like, wait, how did you end up in that situation? And people who know me how are like, wait, you, the guy we see standing before you, went through all of that? How the heck did that happen? That's not what this story is about. But fast forward from 2014, 2016, I had decided to make a beeline for Colorado. I was living in Spokane at the time. I needed to get out of Colorado or out of Spokane, and my brother offered me to come live with him and his wife in Colorado. He paid for my bus ticket, gave me a few bucks because I was completely and totally dead broke. I was homeless at the time. Again, a whole nother story. But I was homeless. I had nothing keeping me in Spokane. And so I needed to get a fresh start, a fresh look at things. And I needed to get away from some things. And so my brother and my dad pitched in to get me a bus ticket. And I got down to Colorado and I stayed with my brother. He had some really good friends down there, and one of them gave me a job for the summer. Now, at this point, I'd been a chiropractor for 7 years. 7 years I had been a chiropractor. I hadn't really worked a physical job in a very long time. But my brother's friend had a landscaping company. And this is Colorado in the summertime. So it was hard work. And it was really therapeutic for me. Really therapeutic for me to do some good, hard physical work. Sweating out in the hot sun, hauling wheelbarrows full of gravel, digging ditches, and just being out in nature and working with this guy and with the crew that he had. And it was a good time because this guy was a very strong Christian. And we would have talks about God. And a couple of the other guys on the crew were also Christians. But I was in a place where I was bitter. I had turned my back on God. I had done everything that I thought I was supposed to do in order to have a family, in order to be the man of God. I mean, needless to say, I had fallen way short. But in my mind, I had done everything that I was supposed to do. And since my ultimate purpose was to be a husband and a father and to be a provider, and that was now taken away from me, and I blamed God for that, suddenly I had no sense of purpose. And I would sit in the back of the pickup truck at the crew, going back and forth between jobs, and I would just piss and moan about God and how terrible he was and how much he had let me down. Like, how could he do that? How could a good God allow me and my children and my family and all these people that I loved to go through so much pain? How could he steal the one thing that was part of my purpose, that was supposed to be who I was, a husband and a father? How could he take that away from me? And I blamed God so much. And I had come to a place where I had kind of acknowledged, I kind of accepted the fact that, well, maybe the God that I understood, maybe the God that I knew, maybe the God that I believed in didn't even exist. And I was ready to turn my back on the whole thing. And I was at this crossroads. I was teetering, really teetering. And I pretty much had started to lean over the edge. And like, I might still talk about God. I might still even occasionally read my Bible or pray or whatever, but I wasn't going to. I might talk about God, but I wasn't really going to live for God. I was down a different road because how could this happen to me? How could a good God do this to me? So I was sitting in the back of the truck one day and I was just lamenting about all this stuff and just like angry and bitter and just using all kinds of foul language in reference to God. So we were driving from one job to another and we had to stop and pick up some equipment, exchange some equipment for the next job. And we get out of the truck and one of the guys comes up to me and he's like, "Hey, Andrew, can I pray for you?" And I'll never forget like all that went through my brain. I'm like, I mean, I guess, but like, I wasn't really expecting anything. I wasn't really in a place. I was just like, full fine. If you want to pray for me, that's cool. Little did I know what would happen. Little did I know that that would be a pivotal moment in my life. But this guy comes up to me. Pardon me, I might get a little emotional. He puts one hand on each shoulder and gets about 6 inches away from my face. And in the most sincere, earnest, and loving voice that I have ever heard come out of another person, he said, and also with as much confidence, he said, "Andrew, you still believe in God." God doesn't usually work this way in my life. I'm pretty rational, pretty much, and I kind of just Like God speaks to me through common sense, and I just kind of, oh, well, yeah, that makes sense. Da, 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 da. But not this day. On this day, this guy said, Andrew, you still believe in God. I lost all the strength in my legs and I dropped. And he was fast enough that he caught me under my arms, and one guy was standing behind me. Between these two guys, they caught me as my legs buckled out from underneath me. And I just started weeping. I started weeping the tears of sorrow and regret and just all the pent up emotion of the last couple of years and all of the just mess that I had gone through. There was tears coming from my eyes. There was snot running out of my nose, and I could barely catch my breath. There was just so much, because in that moment, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was right. And I knew that I still believed in God. And I knew that it wasn't some new interpretation of God. I knew it wasn't what I had previously understood about God. I knew that this was a God who was my father. I knew this was a God who loved me. And I knew that this was a God who was looking out for me. And he had my back, and that everything that had happened had been part of his will. He had orchestrated it. And in that moment, God went from something that I believed in, because that's how I was raised, and because my parents were Christians, and because I had gone to church. It went from that to something that I believed in. It went from someone else's God that I believed in to a God that I believed in. That was my personal Savior, that loved me and that I loved him. A God that had been there the entire time. A God who had never left me, even when I didn't believe, even when I was ready to turn my back on him and live a life how I wanted to live. That God was the one that showed up that day. That God who had picked me out of everyone else to use to tell a story, to tell his story, to tell my story. It was no longer an impersonal God up in the sky. It was my personal God. And my life was forever changed that day. Yes, I still had a mess to deal with. I still didn't have custody of my kids. My wife was still out of the picture. I was still dealing with separation from my family and friends. I still had bridges that I had burned. But now the trajectory had changed. And it didn't change all overnight, right? It didn't happen all of a sudden that my life was suddenly better. But I can count from that day forward that the trajectory changed. And slowly but surely my life started to get back on track. Because I now knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I still believed in God. And that's why I'm titling this episode, You Still Believe. Because I knew that I did. And I knew that I was on the path now. And I knew that God was behind me. And I knew, yes, there was a lot of work still ahead. But I knew that if I followed that path and I continued to follow after God, that he had chosen me for this reason, and that life would get better, and that his will would be done in my life, and that God would use me for his purposes and his will. So that's my story from today. I'll get into more details about the ins and outs of how all these happen in the future, but I just wanted to tell that story today to encourage you. 10 years ago today, my life was completely falling apart. And at the time of this recording was actually the time when things were really spiraling. I had just found out some really terrible things. It was at this time of day, 10 years ago, that I started to doubt God. And now today I have no doubt. I have no doubt about who God is in my life. And my life is on a completely different trajectory. So I hope you got something out of this story, because I certainly did. And we will talk to you next time. So if you like this content, please give it a rating, a review, and share it with your friends. Also, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me and what I'm all about and what I can maybe do for you, check out my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. That's thedangerousgentleman.org. Thank you for listening.